Every day, the news brings more and more images of random violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms. Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Ronnie Ersenbach, and this is the Band Media Podcast, where we will be talking about the art that crossed that line. So, I grew up watching the old Adam West Batman TV show. Like, not as it was on, but in reruns and syndications during the day and after school. It was and still is, in fact, a show I love dearly. I even dressed up as the Burt Ward version of Robin for Halloween when I was like 6 years old. And before you get all you dressed up as the sidekick, I will let you know that the character of Robin is cool as shit, and both our names started with an R. So let my inner child go trick-or-treating in peace. One of the bonuses of watching it in syndication in reruns was that it was on like every weekday instead of just once or twice a week. Fun fact, the original Batman 66 show did actually air twice a week for the first two seasons, before dropping down to once a week for the third and final season. The downside of watching it in syndicated reruns is that it didn't necessarily run in order, or at least I didn't catch them in order. In the third season, Yvonne Craig would join the cast of the show as Batgirl, changing the dynamic duo into the terrific trio. I fucking loved Batgirl. Now, obviously, Yvonne Craig, who sadly passed away of breast cancer in 2015, was absolutely stunning. But if we put that aside for a moment, Batgirl was such a badass. I remember that they updated the animated intro so that at the end, on the shot of the Batmobile, Batgirl would drive in front of it on her motorcycle. Fast forward to when I was watching the show out of order, that little animation would let me know my favorite character would be appearing. And I would watch the opening bursting with anticipation each episode, just hoping I would see Batgirl slide across the screen in her Batcycle. Now, over the past 2 years of making this humble podcast, I've played a very similar game when writing each episode on whether or not I will be adding Joe Nasty Daddy Lieberman into the introduction of the episode. Now, you may ask, dearest listeners, friends if I may be so bold, but you are writing it. How can you be surprised by it? Well, first of all, congrats on being quoted on the podcast. I made the damn thing and I never get quoted. Secondly, I never know for certain when Mr. Lieberman will come across my research. Though admittedly, I had a feeling he might, as this week's episode is about a video game from the 90s. Is all of this to say that Joseph Lieberman and Batgirl are basically the same person? No, that's ridiculous. Batgirl fought Catwoman and the Riddler, and Lieberman fought the equally sinister kids playing Mortal Kombat, I guess. Am I saying that our pal Joseph Lieberman is popping his head into this episode? Also no. I just wanted to talk about Batgirl. Oh, you know I'm kidding. For our newer listeners, the voice heard over the music of the theme of this podcast is none other than former United States Senator from Connecticut, Joseph Lieberman. It was taken from his opening statements from the 1993 United States Senate hearings on video games. So much came out of these hearings, but that's another episode, or few episodes. But the takeaway we need for this episode is those hearings directly led to the creation of the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or ESRB if you're in a hurry. If those letters seem vaguely familiar to you, it may be because you have bought a video game in the last 25 years. They appear just under the rating for the game, usually something like E, E10+, T, or M, because that is, after all, the purpose of the ESRB, to give video games their ratings. So, why all this concern in 1993? Video games have been running into controversy all the way back to arcade games like Death Race, which, if you want to know more about Death Race, you can go back and listen to episode 2 of this very podcast. But they also ran into trouble on home systems with games like Custer's Revenge for the Atari 2600, which if you want to know more about, you can go forward and listen to an episode I haven't recorded yet, but will at some point. So why now? And by now, I mean why 1993? Well, video games were coming of age, and the CD-ROM was becoming commonplace. Not only in video game consoles, but more importantly, in home personal computers. And the CD-ROM drive brought with it 3 very important short-lived letters, FMV, or full motion video. Now, I will grant that the resolution was much less stellar, but nonetheless, an entire industry of games built around live action film was sprouting out of this newfound freedom. Now, keep in mind, we're no longer talking about crude 12 by 16 pixel drawings of Italian plumbers, but rather, for the first time, films that you could play. On a personal note, I absolutely adore FMV games and wish they didn't bite the dust as quickly as they did. But despite their short time in the limelight, there were some true giants of video game history in there. Games like Seventh Guest and its sequel, The 11th Hour, Phantasmagoria. Fun fact, Phantasmagoria 2, A Puzzle of Flesh, while not without its problematic elements, has an out and proud gay man as one of the main characters and a bisexual protagonist, being arguably the first LGBTQIA plus playable character in a major video game. Also, games like Wing Commander 3 and 4 used FMV. Sony's Johnny Mnemonic became the first video game produced by a film company, Sony. There was also the infamous Night Trap. There's a lot to say about Night Trap, but again, that's another episode. Just know that it was arguably the star of the 1993 Senate hearing on video games, despite the fact that if it were a movie, it would be rated PG, and a soft PG at that. But it would end up being labeled M for mature, the harshest rating of the ESRB. Well, almost the harshest rating anyway. Enter the largely unused ESRB rating AO for adults only. And this seems as good a point as any as to hop in with this week's trigger warnings, which is only one, but that one is artistic depictions of sexual violence and assault. Now, just like an X or NC-17 rating for film, an AO rating was a financial death kiss for video games. No stores would want to carry it, and especially in the painfully slow dial-up age of the internet, it's not like anyone would be able to stream it or download it. You had to be a good old-fashioned kind of pervert, willing to walk into the kind of store that would sell these games, look a fellow human being cashier in the eye, and pay cold hard cash for it. Let's be honest, there's a reason pornography fled from the theaters to home videos, and then from home videos to the internet. So, when looking back at the small assortment of adult-only games that came out, you didn't have a whole bunch of variety. A great number of them were nothing more than actual porno movies moved over to CD-ROM, kind of like early DVDs. The main interactive part was you could pick which scene to go to. Mixed in with that, you'd find a handful of more choose-your-own-adventure style porno games, and just some all-out bizarre entries like Wet the Sexy Empire, which happens to be another personal favorite of mine. And it should be noted here that I am specifically talking about what might be called the Western world. Over in the East, Asia and Japan in particular, quite enthralling stories were being told via erotic video games, specifically eroge, which you'll have to forgive me, my Japanese isn't the greatest, but again, that's another episode. But if we are looking through the titles of that all too quickly forgotten bygone era, with the right sort of eyes, you just may come across a little title by the name of Riana Rouge, a hidden gem of a game that manages to carve its own unique identity and separate itself from the pack. The game was released in 1997, the same year that over in the console world, Nintendo was neutering PC hit Duke Nukem 3D for their port, Duke Nukem 64. And just a quick note about this game. More a note about me, but anyway. The game is called Riana Rouge, not Riana Rogue. I have a bad habit of calling it Riana Rogue because that's what I thought the title was called for years, because apparently I can't read. Regardless, I will do my best not to let that unfortunate misnaming step into the podcast, but no promises. The box art for Riana Rouge featured the star of the game, Playboy playmate Jillian Bonner. You can tell it's her because at the bottom of the box it reads, starring Playboy Playmate Jillian Bonner. She is a blonde bombshell, skimpily clad in PVC dominatrix kinkwear from head to toe, and holding what can only be called, and you'll have to forgive me for the technical jargon here, a really big fucking space gun. Under the title, the box promises, quote, a sensual action-adventure, end quote, and of course features the all-too-familiar little white ESRB ratings box at the bottom right corner with the elusive AO rating in it. Jillian Bonner was not only a Playboy Playmate and star of the game, but she was also art director, environmental designer, and executive producer of the whole damn thing. In fact, she even founded and was the owner of Black Dragon, the company that created Riana Rouge. Truly a woman of little clothing, but many hats. Jillian Bonner was born on February 26, 1966 in Athens, Georgia, but moved to Atlanta when she was about 2. A self-proclaimed tomboy, she also had a love of art and drawing from an early age. She mostly stayed out of trouble growing up. Quote, I got in a little trouble here and there, but, most of the time I did what was right, end quote. She started modeling when she was a teenager. She also showed an early interest in computers. When she graduated from high school, she had to make a decision. Move to New York and become a full-fledged model, or stay where she was and go to Southern Methodist University and get a degree in computer engineering. But I mean, was it a decision? Really? On one hand, you have become a well-paid model traveling the world or attend Southern Methodist University. Of course, she became a fucking model, but computers never left her heart. In fact, her career as a model took off so well, she became a model with the world-famous modeling agency Elite and did work for the likes of Guess and CoverGirl. In fact, her career as a model took off so well that she became a model with the world-famous modeling management agency Elite and did works for the likes of Guess and CoverGirl. It got so crazy that in the 1980s, she actually got her own computer to keep track of her finances. Now, that may not seem like such a huge deal today, but keep in mind, Windows 3.0, which was the first to feature the crowd pleaser Solitaire, wasn't released until 1990. And when her computer crashed, it was Bonner herself who opened it up and repaired it. The young entrepreneur would open up not one, not two, but 3 computer-related companies by the time she was 30. Not to mention, she had a short-lived column on Playboy's website called Virtually Jillian, where she worked on bridging the gender gap that at the time was prevalent in the internet and technology in general, and quite frankly still is today. Fun fact, she would do a profile on Virtually Jillian of Barbary Bruner, who, besides having a very fun name to say, was an executive producer at Sierra Online at the time. Sierra itself having been co-founded and co-owned by the incomparable, amazing, absolute icon Roberta Williams, who herself ran into controversy with her game, the original Phantasmagoria. And if all that weren't enough, she began to study animation in the early 90s when she moved to Sarasota, Florida, and started taking classes at the Ringling School of Art and Design. Then, in 1995, she would found Black Dragon Studios and began work on Riana Rouge. The project would eventually pick up and move to Los Angeles, but before it did, it picked up the, at the time, aspiring writer / quote, anything anyone would pay me to do that was kind of mindless, typing, filing, Xeroxing, so I could save the rest for writing and directing, end quote, human by the name of Nancy Oliver. When the project moved from Florida to California, Nancy moved with it. Now, if that name sounds slightly familiar to you, it may be because you remember her from directing Season 1, Episode 11 of True Blood. Or, being co-executive producer, supervising producer for the first 4 seasons of the show. Or maybe her work as a writer and co-producer on the show 6 Feet Under. But what most likely you know her from is from writing the Humanitas Prize-winning and WGA Award Satellite Award, and most prestigiously, Academy Award nominated screenplay, Lars and the Real Girl, which is an absolutely fabulous and kind film. It should be noted that the person who did take home the Oscar that year for Best Original Screenplay was Diablo Cody for her screenplay for Juno, which was the film that cemented Elliot Page as a bona fide star. Fun fact, before writing the screenplay for Juno, Diablo Cody had in fact been a full-time stripper. And to fill out some of the other members of the crew, we have director Carlo Kiliaco, whose only previous credit was a story concept for a 1994 first-person puzzle/educational game called Astronomica, The Quest for the Edge of the Universe, and whose only credit after Rihanna was producing the video game Finding Nemo, Nemo's Underwater Fun World, in 2003. Actor Joshua Cain, who played the role of every male character in the game, including Gash. Gash isn't a particularly important character to the game, but Gash is the character who has my favorite name to say. And Heather Lawler plays Javelin, what one would call the love interest of Rihanna's. And sadly, I wish I could find more info on Heather Lawler, because not only was she gorgeous and kick-ass as Javelin, but also she is credited as an environment creator, character designer, and a 2D animator for Blood and Guts. And really, the blood and guts in this game, while primitive, are exceptionally gory and imaginative. Just fan-fucking-tastic all the way through. Also, a killer soundtrack by a band by the name of Bloom. The game itself has a simple setup. In the real world, our hero Rihanna is but a mousy secretary at some sort of high-rise business. She accidentally bumps into the new girl, an absolutely gorgeous redhead whose name we don't know. She asks Rihanna about the boss. Rihanna warns her to just be careful when it comes to him. But before she can explain, the boss pops his head out and beckons the new girl to come take a letter. Not but a moment after the door closes, Rihanna hears the sounds of struggle from behind the door. She comes in the office to see her boss mid-sexual assault on the new girl. In an attempt to save her, Rihanna tries her best to intervene, but is accidentally pushed out the window of their very tall building in the process. When she wakes up, she finds herself in an ancient temple being looked over by the new girl, who now wears a leather dress and calls herself Javelin. She tells Rihanna of the prophecy that, quote, a woman of strength and wholeness will save us, end quote, from a man that she only refers to as the evil stranger. Rihanna protests at first, but Javelin is kidnapped by giant mechanical spiders, and right then and there, she makes up her mind, quote, I'm going after her, end quote. You know, giant mechanical spiders, tale as old as time. With the exception of one shooting section, the mechanics of the game rest around two main themes. The first is puzzle solving, an absolute classic for your point-and-click adventure games. And the second revolves around a thing known as the emotivator. The emotivator lets the player choose which emotion to react to a situation with. That, in turn, determines the outcome of that situation. At the beginning, you are faced with 3 worlds to overcome. You must defeat all 3 to beat the game, but you can go in any order you wish. Each time you transport to a different world, Rihanna morphs from her homely office attire into the clothes and makeup and hair of a warrior that matches that particular world. Well, a sexy warrior. And of course, in keeping with the AO rating, each of these transformations has her completely nude in the middle as she morphs from one state to another. Rihanna also has fun little interactions with player, like when you click on her, she says, quote, play with yourself, I'm busy, end quote. And when you die in these wonderful fantasy worlds, a fax, that's right, completely unironically, is sent back to the real world with a scantily clad Rihanna and a message that says, quote, I'm not that easy, try again, sucker, end quote. And gives you the option to either restart the game or load a saved game. The first world, which is located on disc 1 of the 3-disc set, is known as the prison world. Riana wakes up in prison and must find a way to escape not only her cell, but also get off the planet in general. While the other levels certainly have their moments, this level is by far the goriest. We're talking heads blown off by electricity and machine guns that blow away entire sections of the body. This level also contains the shooting sequence. A fun little interlude, but I'm glad it's not the entire level. The next world, the World of Indulgences, is very much the fantasy level of the game. While this level is noticeably less frequent with the violence, though it does contain a puzzle where if you smell the wrong flower, you sneeze so hard you blow your face off all the way down to the skull, it is by far the level with the most sex. I know, the World of Indulgences, who would have guessed? In this world, you enter a sexual Eden that is guarded over by sexual shrubberies. And no, these ain't your daddy's Knights Who Say Knee shrubberies. These CG wonders are in the form of human bodies entangled in several Kama Sutra-esque positions. This level also contains the two full-blown sex scenes of the game, one being man on woman and the other being woman on woman. Also, for good measure, a puzzle about eating where Riana will vomit if you get the wrong answer. The third world is maybe the most unfortunate. It's called Native Island. It is your goal to save a dying race of aliens who can no longer reproduce. Not like that. The unfortunate thing being that the aliens are pretty clearly based on the stereotypes of the indigenous folks of the Americas. While the game clearly shows no ill intent or intent on mocking these folks, it also isn't handled with the most delicate gloves. All that being said, I think it could have been a lot worse for 1997, but I think it deserves at the very least to be noted here in 2022. But on the positive side, there is a gourd in one of the puzzles, which Riana exclaims, quote, "Good gourd," end quote, when she finds. And the final battle of that world takes place in a building that is designed to look like a giant clitoris. After you defeat these three worlds, it leads us to the final level, known simply as the castle. The castle is where things get really interesting. Yes, it still has the scantily clad sex appeal we have come to know and love at this point, with Riana dressed as what can only be described as an S&M version of Marvel's The Punisher. And it also continues with the gore factor, with bodies skewered on poles similar to Cannibal Holocaust, which, by the way, is episode 4 of this fine podcast, if you ever care to give a listen to it. But some of the more feminist undertones and themes that had been there through the entire game start to step into the light. You head up the tower in pursuit of your love javelin, and on every floor you face down a different form of abusive man. The type of men that have presumably been plaguing Riana her whole life, ranging from the typical and stereotypical physically abusive type all the way towards the quote-unquote nice guy type who believes that his acts of kindness entitle him to the love or physical affection of a woman. Not an archetype that was talked about a lot back in 97, and honestly probably not talked about enough today. Now, am I claiming that this little piece of video game history is some sort of feminist opus? I mean, not quite, but I do hope that it is remembered a little more than it currently is. And I do hope the story of a woman who defied society's expectations to be either smart or pretty, but never both, who put together a ragtag team to make a video game that thematically tried and mostly succeeded, living far ahead of its time, is told a little bit more. Sadly, the video game ends with the message, quote, "This is not the end," end quote. Which, being as there's been no talk of Riana for the last 25 years outside of its small cult following, it may in fact be that that was the end for Riana. But it certainly wasn't the end for Nancy Oliver. I love Riana Rouge, just like I love Batgirl in the old Batman series. But, all love to the old show, it was nice to see Riana in each level and not just hope that this would be one of the 1 in 3 times that she showed up. It should also be noted that there were 2 additional worlds called Tree World and Fun World that never made it into the game. There are some behind-the-scenes shots from Jillian Bonner's old website that has been abandoned now for quite some time and is a little hard to find, but I'll leave a link in the show notes. Or if you want, you can check out my Instagram, where I will post some as well. Oh, and one final fact. I'll miss you, friends. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the Band Media Podcast. Oh, there goes that music again. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Band Media Podcast. Email us at bandmediapodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ronnie Ursenbach. And please like, comment, subscribe. And if you donate blood, come join our Band Media Podcast team on the Red Cross app. And if you don't donate blood, then think about starting and then do the thing I just said. Well, that's enough of my rambling for now, but keep being wonderful, dear listeners. Adios.